Mission Chats with Jon Crowe.
Thanks again for your interest in Mission Chats, and in this episode I wrap up my conversation with Josh Summers, and in this he shares a couple of stories from his ministry experience and things he's seen God doing, and also gives some perspective on missions and how to use an ability in business to further the kingdom of God. So I hope you'll enjoy this final episode with Josh Summers.
Well, I always love to hear God stories, as I call them, stories of what you've seen God do in or through you over your years of ministry. I don't know if you have one or two of those that you could share with us for encouragement and insight.
I'll share one that's more internal and then kind of share one that's a little more external. So this has to do with my interrogation. So I'll kind of bring you into the place where I was at, if you don't mind, for just a minute. So they drove me an hour from my home in China to an interrogation facility. So I'm in the back of a vehicle with two policemen on either side of me. So I guess I don't like open a door and roll out the car. I don't know why. But they bring me into, and whatever you imagine when it comes to like these interrogation TV shows or movies, that was essentially what it is. I'm brought into this room. There's a table, and I've got three of my accusers, a camera pointed at me, and then I've got a single chair. And I'm going through 10, 12 hours of interrogation at a time, just questions after questions, and then a 30-minute break where they just leave me alone in there, and then more questions. And it's not like they ever came and told me outright what they're accusing me of. So I'm kind of piecing this together as I'm listening to the different questioning. And as they're doing that, the proverbial walls in that already small space are feeling like they're closing in, because, you know, it's one thing to be accused of being a Christian in an area like China just frowns on that. But it's the history says that I shouldn't be necessarily too worried. But to be a spy, like when those type of questions start coming up, now I'm getting really worried. Well, it's like, wow, like 2 years would be like a nice sentence in that case. And I'm not trained for this. I as much as we Christians, you know, would like to think that in those situations, we're just going to stand our ground and say, do your worst. You know, it is a really hard situation to be in. So I distinctly remember being in the midst of those questioning, and it felt like I'm starting to maybe hyperventilate a little. This interrogator who, you know, it felt like he hated my guts, is just yelling at me and question after question until he hit this one question. And mind you, this is being done in Chinese. My Chinese is good, but not necessarily good enough for an interrogation. Okay. But I remember him asking me this question where he goes, 你的身份是什么? And 身份 is not necessarily something I would have known, except for the fact that a 身份证 is your ID card in Chinese. Okay. And so 身份 would just be your identity. So he'd asked me, what is your identity? And it was by God's grace, like he used this guy to speak to me in that moment, because I was starting to like just panic to an extreme level. And God, in that moment, had asked me, he said, well, like, what is your identity? Like everything else is getting taken away from you. Your identity as a businessman is being, you know, trashed right now. Your identity as any type of missionary, even my identity as a dad and a husband was being stripped away from me. So in the midst of all of that, am I comfortable? This is, you know, feeling like the Holy Spirit's asking me this. Am I comfortable just being a child of God and letting that be the foundation, even if it's for years, if that's the only identity that I have? And not to say that everything from that moment forward was easy, or that, you know, it was like, oh, okay, and now I'm on cloud nine. Like it was just like this window opened where God and I had just this connection, and I was able to say, all right, God, I don't feel like I can, but I recognize that that's what I'm going to have to do here. And I'm going to let go of all these other things that we all hold on to these different identities.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's not a sinful thing. It's just, we identify in all these different ways. And very rarely do we have a moment where all of that gets stripped. Yeah. But it's in those moments that we have to come to an understanding with God that, okay, God, then it's just you and me. Right. And either you're going to turn your back from God or you're going to run to him. And, you know, thankfully in that moment, he was there to be with me. But yeah, that was a turning point for me in that whole ordeal.
Wow. Yeah. And that's incredible. Yeah. It's amazing how sometimes those not that I ever had that kind of experience specifically, but those moments where everything's just crystallized and very clear for you.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah. And then
So
you mentioned
then,
a second story. Yeah, I'd love to hear a
yeah.
little more about that too.
Yeah. So this one is one of my favorites just because, yeah, I told you about planting seeds that in a garden you never get to see. And this is one of the few times where I got to actually see it. So we did exit right out of China in 2018. And it was in May of 2018. So back up just a little bit. We were taken in China on my wife's birthday. And
Okay.
so fast forward a year later, we've been in the US for an entire year and my wife's birthday is coming up. And it's kind of this bittersweet
Right.
moment where, we want to celebrate her birthday, but this is also the 1 year anniversary of this traumatic event. And how do we deal with this? So I'm on a flight. I was flying somewhere in the US at that time and I checked my phone and I looked down and it was an email. It was just this very random email through one of my travel website contact forms
Okay.
that just basically said, is this Josh, one of the Far West China, website and all that stuff. If he's still there, I have something I need to send to you. Picture. I have a
Yeah.
picture I need to send to you. Oh
Okay.
my gosh. Like that just sounds terrible right off the bat, right? Like I don't know what it was that made me think, okay, well, let's who knows? It didn't sound terrible. It was just,
Right.
okay, well, we'll give this a try. So I did, and I get this picture back, and it was our neighbors who had been able to flee that area and go to a neighboring country. And they sent this picture. And apparently what had happened is they had met a foreign traveler in a coffee shop. And they said, hey, do you know like this guy who does Far West China? And this person apparently had bought my travel guide. And he's like, well, I know his face or his website. And they're like, can you just take a picture of us, send it to him and let him know that we're okay.
No way.
We made it out. And so we, like on my wife's birthday, I literally was able to give her a picture of our friends and their kids. And they now had a second one with a note that was basically saying, we're okay.
Yep.
And we are so grateful for your investment in our lives.
Yeah.
And like your encouragement, like, so they're now believers. And like, it was the best gift that I could have given my wife that I have no control over. Like I am not the reason that was such a good gift. Yeah. But I remember just how impactful that was to be able to say, wow, God, like you allowed us to see one of those seeds that got planted and now to know that they're okay from that situation. Cause we even have to deal with survivor's guilt, having left that place. Yeah. So knowing that they're okay. Right. And that was it was such a gift from God and really cool to see how God continues to use them in the new country that they're in.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. Well, thank you. Those are both great stories of God at work in you and kind of this little blessing after a challenging time. No, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Those are, two wonderful stories. I appreciate you sharing, just what you've seen God doing in and through you. And I always like to ask my guests, how would they describe missions from their experience? And obviously, I think your experience is probably quite different from many. So I'm curious how you'll express this one. But let us know what you're thinking.
Yeah, I think that there's nothing I'm going to say that's truly mind-blowing, I don't think. But, missions just being an ambassador in whatever capacity God has to send you out. So whether that is in business or whether that is, in just whatever, a teacher or being a student in a different country, I believe that, being an ambassador is doing whatever it is that God has asked you to do in the best way that you possibly can. I want to run the best and most profitable business that I can. I'm not afraid of money. I just know that, there are things that I can do with a business that maybe other people can't. And so I want to steward that asset well. And I think that each of us are given these assets, whether it's skills or business or, I have some friends that are just unbelievable evangelists and stewarding that well and using that in the best way by being an ambassador. And so that's, I don't know, that would be probably the best way that I would describe it.
Oh, that's good. And then thinking about others who actually kind of on this track, then they do have, they're maybe not an evangelist, at least spiritually, additionally gifted in evangelism. I think we're all
Yeah.
evangelists at some level, but yeah, maybe do have more of a bent towards, making money and making business work. What would you encourage people like that, who might be considering, well, how can I use this in missions?
I think that there are so many opportunities that we don't recognize when we limit what we define as a missionary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been something hard, and I'm still kind of processing and going through my own, journey of figuring out what do I think about that, even that word, and
Yeah.
how does it apply to me. But it's more than what we just initially think, right? And I've seen, I know some people that are. I've got a friend who's an engineer in Dubai, right?
Yeah.
And he is in a paying job. It is a full-time job, and they just relocated him to Dubai.
Mm.
But he works and is a witness, and like I said, he's that ambassador in that place that has no other believers in that company.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's difficult, but that is a way that somebody can use a skill set that they have and serve God overseas. And then, same for myself. I've got what I would consider a location independent business. I can take my camera and my computer, and as long as I've got an internet connection, there's a lot that I can do with my business. And that is a blessing. And there's a lot of that's kind of coming up now with remote work and ways in which, I can still do my work and maybe even live in this part of the world and volunteer my time, on the side or on the weekends over here. I think there are a lot of those opportunities that we maybe discount or think, oh, that's not missions because it's not like full-time supported missions.
Yeah.
I think there are just a lot of other ways. One of the things that I have the privilege of doing is where we are in Thailand, there have been opportunities to connect with what we would call the third world missions community. In churches where back in their home country, let's say in Africa or Mongolia, the idea of supporting a full-time pastor in their church is hard enough, much less sending one of their people to a different location. And the irony is that a lot of those people would actually fit in better with the cultures that we're trying to, reach with the gospel than we as Westerners would.
Sure.
So like, it would be amazing to get those out there. And right now, one of the things that they've learned from us as Westerners is missions is raising funds. So if we're going to do it either in our country or we're going to, raise funds in the US. And the opportunity I've had is to just at least getting people to start thinking about creative funding. What does it look like to creatively fund missions? It doesn't have, like you were talking about, how do you support, business and missions at the same time? Well, there's a part of that's the assumption that I have to be doing a full-time job. That even doesn't have to be the case, right? It could be remote work where you're just working, a few hours in the evening, or you wake up early in the morning to do that work, just enough to support you. Whether it's doing freelancing stuff for a lot of these, like third world, African or Mongolian or even Southeast Asian people, like there's a lot of great work. I've even from my business, I've hired a number of Filipinos to work as virtual assistants. And, those type of opportunities are available, and, for them, pay fairly well, and you can do it kind of on your own time. So thinking through creatively, how could we fund this that's outside just what we would think about the typical 9 to 5, or on the flip side, how, beyond just we've got to raise the funds. Because I again, hearkening back to the very, very beginning of our conversation, I think there are benefits from the way that I relate to the community that I'm in. There are benefits of doing business and having that kind of connection, that economic connection with the community that really establishes a somewhat deeper trust, maybe, but definitely a good relationship with that community. So that's, I don't know, that would be my challenge to anybody who's thought about missions or is even in the mission field right now. I know that sometimes it's hard to accept people who are doing missions in a different way, right? Oh, I don't want to have somebody that's doing business on my team because maybe they can't make all the meetings. Trust me, I know, I've been there. I understand what the challenge of that is, but there is value to adding that perspective to a team. If you're already in missions, there's value if you are not in directly in missions and you have an opportunity to spend a couple months doing remote work in a different country. I encourage you to try to take that, like try to open your ideas to what could be missions beyond just what is traditional missions, so to speak.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. Good word there. And just thinking about that, are there one or two resources that maybe pop to front of mind, a book or a web blog or something of something to be helpful for someone who's trying to find how to do this? I mean, there's 101 how to be an entrepreneur and start a business, but actually more specific to mission and using business as your mission kind of platform. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, Patrick Lai obviously has a number of great books on that. If people that have access to Right Now Media, I think Right Now Media has this whole thing of faith and work.
Okay.
And then there is like a BAM global kind of movement. I'm not directly a part of, but that I think has a lot of great resources as well for those that might be looking into what that would look like.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Well, Josh, it's been a huge blessing and just a great encouragement to hear your story and just to see how you've persevered through things I'm sure you probably wouldn't have chosen up front to go through, but the Lord's used all of that to bring you to where you are today, and that's always just so exciting to see. Is there any final words you want to share with our audience?
I'm excited about the book coming out. And so if they can see more about that, like I said, at BibleMemoryGold.com/book and just see what that's all about.
And I imagine it'll be available through all the major online retailers at some point.
Exactly.
You got plans to do an audiobook? I've started getting into audiobooks just because it feels like I'm more productive when I'm listening and doing.
Yes. I think this book will make a great audiobook. So that will be coming out also in September.
Fantastic. Very good. Well, Josh, thanks so much for your time and blessings on all the Lord has ahead for you.
Thank you, John. Same to you.
Thanks for listening as always, and I hope you've been blessed and encouraged by this conversation with Josh Summers. If this is a new podcast for you, then I'd encourage you to go back and check out some of our previous guests. And please do take a moment to share this podcast with others you know who may be interested.
Find us online at missionchats.com